passenger rail. President Biden's America's Jobs Plan would introduce and expand new passenger rails in communities like the Lehigh Valley and across the country. But how realistic is this plan? And if implemented, what does it mean for commuters? Tom Shortell, reporter for the Allentown Morning Call, joins us to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. The expansion of passenger rail for communities like the Lehigh Valley across the country. President Biden's America's Jobs Plan would expand passenger railway options for transportation in various communities across our country. But of course, it faces Republican challenges in the Congress, as well as a question of how realistic is this implementation, and if implemented, what does it mean for commuters? I'm joined tonight by Tom Shortell, reporter for the Allentown Morning Call. Tom, welcome to Face the Issues.
Sam, thanks for having me back.
Always good to have you, my friend. Let's break this down. America's Jobs Plan. This is the big infrastructure bill that President Biden has introduced in the upwards of $2 trillion. It is currently being debated by the Congress. We can talk about the future of that later on. But the big part of this plan, and the part that's kind of gotten the attention of everybody across the country, is the expansion of passenger rail. What does that mean, and what all would that entail?
Well, that's, I'll be honest, Sam, I'm a little skeptical about where that's going to be going, but they have called for massive expansions of Amtrak, including into Allentown. The city, Allentown hasn't had any passenger rail in decades. Last time it was here, it was down to Philly, and that was obviously that was not Amtrak itself, and the current plan would reconnect Allentown to New York for the first time since the early 60s, I believe.
Wow. And so this is something that's not necessarily, wouldn't be necessarily new to the Valley, and that you said decades ago we've had passenger rail from the Valley, but certainly new in the sense of where it might connect to, and certainly something that most of today's commuters have not experienced before, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, we're talking about this hasn't been here in generations, and it's interesting because we've reached a point, particularly during the pandemic, where we are a very attractive location to people in New Jersey, in New York, because we are still within commuting distance of the city. For people who are still physically commuting, there's been a lot of work from home last year or so. But for people who are still looking to have that physical connection, to need to be in New York, this would be a real option for them potentially, but probably not anytime soon.
And let me ask you about that. You said not anytime soon. I mean, the total, first of all, the plan, what people are mistaking is that they think this is something that if it passes today, will be done tomorrow. The plan stretches out over 15 years. The Amtrak maps that were released were dated 2035. So this is something that would take time in building out. The other big issue, of course, is the price tag. It is priced at in the upwards of $2 trillion. There's a lot of pundits are saying this is unlikely to pass without some form of negotiation. What have you been hearing? I know Senator Casey recently did a town hall about this. What have you been hearing from Pennsylvania's delegation about the potential of this coming to pass?
Well, the debate that's taking place right now in Congress is. It's really Republican senators with President Biden at this point. And those negotiations have, for the most part, been behind closed doors. The entire plan, not just rail, was initially around $2.3 trillion. a number of Republicans have come out and they've been haggling around. With numbers. President Biden came down to, I believe it was 1.7 trillion. If you want to say coming down to a few trillion, the Republican senators have raised theirs into the mid 900 billions, but there's still that's still a massive gap that we're talking about. Negotiations are going to continue, but as of right now, it's not entirely clear what's going on, particularly because the biggest issue is how they're going to fund it all. That question comes down to the president wants to raise corporate taxes. Republicans generally want to see user fees, things like tolls or tickets in the case of rail. So that's the negotiation there.
Sure. And to your point, the Republicans have proposed a counterproposal. One of the senators on that is the other senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Pat Toomey. And the competing infrastructure plan was originally priced out at $568 billion. To your point, this is coming up to about $900 billion right now as they move toward compromise. The interesting thing about the Republicans' competing bill is that it allocates $20 billion for rail. The president's original plan allocated $25 billion. If the Republicans had their infrastructure bill passed, so obviously we're probably going to approach compromise, but if the Republicans had theirs passed, that's a $5 billion difference. Is it still likely that we're going to see some form of rail expansion, regardless of which version passes or what the compromise is?
That's an interesting one, and I don't think anyone has an answer on that just yet. The Northeast gets. I mean, we're densely populated. We do have some rail infrastructure, so they wouldn't necessarily be starting from scratch everywhere. But they haven't really made any clear distinctions on that yet. I think they're still haggling over the numbers. Once they reach the numbers, they're likely to come back and determine what they can do with those numbers. So I don't know what that means for Allentown just yet, and I don't know if anyone has an answer determined.
Sure. To your, just logistically speaking, again, to your point, there are negotiations right now. What passes, we don't know. And then, of course, the content of what passes and how that's implemented, these are question marks left to be seen. Logistically, and speaking of hypotheticals, where do we know where the proposed rail would run? I mean, you mentioned before, 30 years ago, Lehigh Valley commuters could commute to Philly by train. And I'll ask you later on about this one-time experiment they were going to run a few years ago, but that would have gone to New York. There are some that commute down to DC, going through, they drive to Philly or Wilmington, take the train from there. Do we know where these routes would connect to if they were to come to the Lehigh Valley?
Not yet. Some of the rail, the last time that they were talking about rail in this area, like a rail expansion, serious talks, not just kicking around ideas, was actually extending New Jersey Transit up into the Poconos. And they would have needed to build a couple of dozen miles of track to connect and get over the Delaware River. That wasn't even coming to the Lehigh Valley. That was just coming within spitting distance of us. So the exact routes, it gets tricky. They obviously would want to connect somewhere to the existing Amtrak service, but I don't think there's been any clear. I think they want to figure out what resources they'll have at hand before they decide where they're going to do it, or even if they're going to do it, as opposed to investing in other markets.
What would that timeline look like if they figure this out, if this passes and they figure this out, they say, yeah, we want to do this, we want to expand this in the Valley. And this is not just for here in Pennsylvania, across the country. Columbus, Ohio is included in this map, and a lot of other similar kinds of communities. What would that timeline look like? And we said it's not going to be tomorrow, They said 2035 for completion, but would we, like, what kind of progress might we be looking at? How soon, if this were to pass this year, how soon potentially would we be able to take rail for commuting?
That's a good question. And I've not dealt a lot with rail. We don't have rail out here, so I haven't had a lot of opportunity to look into that. But I can tell you that when it comes to making these investments for roads and highways, for example, it takes years of planning, and then it takes years of negotiating like right of way, right? So it's not just a matter of this is where we're going to put it. They need to have planners determine like where they're going to go, and engineers determine that this is the best route to do it, and the costs, the physical barriers, natural barriers in the way that, I mean, if we're going to New York, you got to get over the Delaware River. Where are you going to put a bridge? Where are you going to upset the least amount of people while at the same time not all the same time not going needlessly far out of your way for physical infrastructure here. And one of the interesting things that's come up with the American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure package that we're talking about, is that they're recognizing that in the past, when the country has done a lot of these big infrastructure bills, they've really damaged a lot of communities. They've built highways right through the middle of towns and things like that. But back in the interstates, you'd have what used to be thriving downtowns, and they bought it all out and built over it. And so you have these communities that are now divided by 6-lane highways. So these are the type of things that they're keeping in mind, and whenever these things come up, there's inevitably court challenges. So like they're calling it the 2035 plan. That sounds optimistic to me, but it's, who knows? I've not seen this done before. It's been a long time since the nation's seen investment of this scale take place. So I would be very happy to be wrong.
Fair enough. I think, to your point, a lot of things that we may not think about normally when we prepare for major infrastructure expansions. Tom Shortell, thank you for the insight. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Tom, thank you again for being with us. When we left off, you had talked about the challenges that come with building infrastructure, whether it's rail, whether it's highways, any kind of public transportation. There are a lot of different logistical challenges that have to be met first. One of the other questions, and you had said earlier that passenger rail has not been in the Lehigh Valley for the past 30 years, but there are railways here. What are those being used for at the moment?
Right now, they're being used for freight. Like we're Lehigh, people may know from driving through the region, we're a hotbed for warehouses. There's tons of trucks coming through now. For the same reason, and the reason why that is because we're near a lot of markets, and the trucks can get from here to wherever they need to be within the Northeast relatively quickly. For the same reason, there's a lot of rail cutting through here, and it's all freight. So Norfolk Southern owns just about all the rail lines around here, and it's a very profitable system for them. Years ago, you were alluding to this before, there was talk about doing kind of a test run to see how much interest there would be for an Amtrak service into the city. Norfolk Southern said, well, no, you can't do that. We're making tons of money here. And if you put a passenger line on this, it's going to, and that one would have been a very slow moving one, just kind of like a train for a day sort of deal. And they said, no way, it's going to cost us a fortune if we let you do this. And there's no other rails in here. So if they're thinking about co-opting these rails, we were talking about lawsuits before, I would have to imagine that Norfolk Southern would not be very tolerant of having to share its lines with passenger rail.
So that experiment 5 years ago that you mentioned, where they were going to do a rail for a day to New York City, that did not happen at the end of the day. That was not because of a lack of interest. That was because of this situation with Norfolk Southern.
Yes, yeah. There are a lot of rail enthusiasts here in the Lehigh Valley. That's not to suggest that there aren't challenges here. And I mean, there's a reason that the rail service cut out decades ago. They were they could be more profitable and had larger bases elsewhere. But there are a lot of diehard enthusiasts. There are a lot of people interested in being able to commute. And one of the other things is that, and we've seen this with the highway system, is that once you create access, once you allow create routes to get people to and from, it's going to create demand. So people who are currently would take take New Jersey Transit in from the shore or other parts of New Jersey. Now all of a sudden, Lehigh Valley might be an option for them, and so that could spur further development here, and as a result, create demand. So it's. So it went away, but there is a lot of interest in having it brought back. Yeah, definitely.
Sure. If you build it, they will come, right? Field the dreams. So
exactly.
Let me ask you this, because you brought this up about the idea that a lot of this is creating access and opportunity to transportation. That is the drive of the American Jobs Plan, which has been very criticized, the question of what is infrastructure. And if you are on Twitter, I know you are, that's been a big joke of what is infrastructure. And there's seemingly being cash thrown at things that may not qualify as infrastructure. And the administration's response has been, no, we're building toward getting people access or giving people the opportunity with this transportation. Along those lines, what is that transportation need right now in the Valley? You mentioned earlier, a lot of people are working from home now. Now we know, the Bieber bus company is no more as far as transportation from the Lehigh Valley to New York City goes. Transbridge has kind of opened up at the airport, Lehigh Valley International Airport. With everything going on, these shifts, the direction the American Jobs Plan wants to move in, what is the current need for this kind of public transportation in the Lehigh Valley?
For public transportation, it's hard to say because we've seen a lot of that die out, and we've seen a lot of people move here from the city because they don't want to be in the city, and they could work remotely. But now things have gotten a lot better in a lot of places, and so some of these businesses are saying, "Okay, great, you get to come in now," or not even you get to come in now, you need to come in now. And so all of a sudden, some of the people that may have moved here, and the housing market is still booming, but people who moved here a few months ago may all of a sudden realize that, oh, wow, this is a real pain in the butt to commute from. And so there may be higher demand than there had been. And I believe that some of Bieber's issues had wasn't necessarily with the demand. They had some issues with loans and things like that. So I would not be surprised to see if there is some demand for New York. The interesting thing is that there's greater demand to get to Philadelphia right now. If you look at where people live and where they commute to, there are several thousand more people who had, at least before the pandemic, had been commuting to Philadelphia. Everyone talks about New York, and New York is. I'm biased. I'm from North Jersey.
That's right.
New York is often viewed as the bigger draw, at least compared to Philadelphia. But from a commuting aspect, Philly might make more sense than New York.
The current plans, I mean, so you're right with the Bieber situation. That was more of a financial situation. I mean, Transbridge has picked up. Obviously, like I said, they have a new hub at the airport. I mean, bus routes to Philly and to New York. I mean, is that sufficient at this point? I mean, does rail take away from that? I mean, is there enough to go around?
I don't know if there's enough to go around. There are other services that those bus routes can serve. Those bus companies can serve, but I don't know if what the demand looks like. And I don't know if anyone has a solid take on where things are going to be going from here. I think working remotely is still fresh to a lot of people. I don't know how many companies are willing to do this. And this is a question that everyone is grappling with. You have PennDOT trying to figure out they do their estimates as to how many people are going to be using the road for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And like, this is a big turning point. Do people stay home and continue to work remotely? Do they head back in? And what does this mean for industries where people couldn't do it? Are they going to, like, couldn't work remotely? Are they going to bounce back the same way? Things like so some of these jobs had been, like in the hospitality industry, they have been slower to come back than other aspects of the economy. So that's a great question, and I think a lot of people with better insights and maybe a little smarter than me are still grappling with that one.
Given all of these logistical challenges that you're bringing up, Tom, why even does this still play such a prominent role in that plan? I mean, some people have pointed to, we talked about it earlier, the idea that maybe this is not a point at hard infrastructure, and you had mentioned this a little bit earlier too. Why is all of this still in there if there are so many logistical challenges? And do you think even without it, the American Jobs Plan can still go forward?
Well, that's the real hard question right now, and that's what the politicians are negotiating over. The way that the Senate operates, it's like Democrats would be at a advantage, or they'd be hard pressed to make this work at the 51 vote majority, or even a tiebreaker like 50 vote. It would be simpler mechanically to be able to get some Republican votes on this, but there's big disputes over how to pay for it and what infrastructure is. The Biden plan, a very large portion of it, isn't what people would traditionally consider infrastructure, And even today, people are willing to expand what infrastructure is. Like, I don't know, 15 years ago, people would have considered broadband critical infrastructure. And today, like, I don't think that's a dispute. Everyone agrees that there needs to be high-speed internet. Pennsylvania has some spots that are particularly bad. And so that would be a large benefit to a lot of people. At the same time, a lot of the plan is about things like childcare, senior care, raising the pay for people who take care of like Alzheimer patients or people who aren't capable of caring for themselves, because while that doesn't bring people to work, it gives them the opportunity to work, or at least that's the argument that Democrats and the president are providing. The Republicans have been largely hesitant to adopt that viewpoint. They're still looking at infrastructure as shovels in the ground, building a road, building a highway, rail, and most Republicans, I think, are viewing broadband as a key part of that.
Sure.
The other aspect of it that is getting some criticism from conservative corners has to do with clean energy, converting gasoline-powered vehicles to electric vehicles, arguing that is better for the environment and ultimately better for the economy and physical infrastructure, because you're not going to be dealing with, because it's things like hurricanes or blizzards and things like that would get worse. We saw how bad some of the snowstorms have been getting in Texas, for example, and they want to harden the infrastructure that's there and also create things that might be better suited for the environment. Is that infrastructure? Is like that's an interesting debate that people are starting to have right now.
Sure. So whether or not we're going to have rail in the valley soon, that is left to be seen in more ways than one.
Yeah, I wouldn't say soon, that's for sure.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Tom Shortell, thank you again. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Tom, thank you again for joining us, and thank you for your insights. Closing out, you write for the Allentown Morning Call. There's recently a headline from your paper that said that it was the first day of no new cases of COVID-19 in Lehigh County. This is over a year into the pandemic. I just want to ask you to reflect on everything you've gone through in this last year and that headline and what that means to you and to the future.
Well, that was such welcome news, at least on my part. I mean, I know my family and I, and like so many others, have really been trying our best to stay safe, protect the people around us, and it's been devastating to see what this virus has done to the community, and that was really uplifting. I know people have been, I know people have been getting bad cases of cabin fever. They've just been desperate to get out, and I think it just goes to show that the vaccination effort is really paying off. I think that's the one thing that's really different right now than anything else. That it's been really encouraging to see the cases drop off as vaccinations have become more prevalent. Pennsylvania, as one of the has done very well. It's one of the top states in the country in terms of getting its residents vaccinated, and so it's I'm a lot more optimistic than I was a year ago right now.
Sure. Welcome news indeed. Tom, thank you again for joining us. And my thanks to each of you for tuning in, and we hope you'll tune in again right here next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chan. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.